The Young and the Restless Spoilers. The sterile, cold air of the hospital room felt suffocating to Noah Newman as he lay there, eyes open but distant, staring at the ceiling above. The machines that surrounded him beeped rhythmically, marking the passing time as his body slowly healed, but his mind was another story. The accident had taken so much more than just his physical well-being. His memories, the very fabric of his identity, had been torn apart, leaving behind only fragments of a life that felt both familiar and foreign. And the harder he tried to grasp onto something, anything, the further it seemed to slip away. It was supposed to be a miracle that he was alive, but all Noah could feel was loss. The good memories, the ones that should have been the foundation of his recovery, felt like they were fading, slipping through his fingers like sand. He could remember the darkness of the accident, the terrifying moment when everything spun out of control, but the light of happiness, of his life before that moment, was gone. His family, his friends, the love he had once known, it was all becoming a blur. Allie, the woman who had stood by him for over a year, the woman he had once held close, was a stranger now. She sat by his bedside, her eyes filled with worry, her hands gently grasping his. She had been there through it all, from the highs of their love to the lows of his recovery. But Noah, lost in the fog of his mind, couldn't see her as the woman who had shared his life. To him, she was just a shadow in the background of his fading memories. When Nick and Sharon arrived, they could see the emptiness in their son's eyes, the confusion that had taken hold of him. The doctors had warned them that Noah's memory loss might be permanent, but they refused to accept it. They had hoped that with time, Noah would remember the love that had shaped his life. But now, as they stood by his hospital bed, they realized just how much had been erased. Their son, the one they had known so well, was slipping further away from them every day. "Allie," Sharon said, her voice breaking as she spoke. "We need to call her. She's the one who can reach him." Nick nodded silently, his heart heavy with the realization that they were losing him in ways they hadn't prepared for. There was nothing they could do to fix this, it was out of their hands. The doctors couldn't promise anything, and the emotional toll on them as parents was taking its own toll. They weren't just dealing with the fear of losing Noah physically, they were losing the essence of him. The Noah they knew, the Noah who had been strong and filled with love, was no longer there. Allie arrived in Los Angeles as quickly as she could, her heart pounding in her chest as she entered the hospital room. The moment she laid eyes on Noah, everything else seemed to fade. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she gently took his. "Noah," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "It's me. It's Allie. I'm here." Noah's eyes flickered over her face for a moment, and then he pulled his hand away, his expression blank. "I don't know you," he said, his voice cold, his words like daggers to Allie's heart. Allie's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, unable to comprehend what was happening. "Noah, it's me. Please, don't you remember?" she pleaded, her voice breaking with the pain of his rejection. She reached for him again, her fingers brushing his arm, but he recoiled. "Stay away from me," Noah said harshly, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know who you are. I don't want you here." Allie's heart shattered. The man she had loved, the man she had shared her life with, was now a stranger. She had hoped, prayed even, that the connection they once shared would be enough to bring him back, to remind him of the love they had built together. But now, she was nothing more than a memory he didn't want. Tears welled up in Allie's eyes as she stood there, frozen in disbelief. She had fought so hard to be here for him, to help him through this. But now, all she had was rejection. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears away, but the ache in her chest wouldn't go away. "Noah," she whispered, barely able to speak through the lump in her throat. "Please, remember me. Please." But Noah's response was cold and final. "I don't remember you," he said again, his voice growing more detached. "I only want Audra. I remember Audra. She's the one I need." It was as if a knife had been twisted into Allie's heart. Audra. That name, once a distant part of Noah's past, now seemed to be the only thing he could remember with clarity. Audra had been a part of his life before Allie, and now, as Noah fought to recall something familiar, it seemed that Audra was the only thing his mind could latch onto. Allie's sobs filled the room, but Noah didn't seem to care. In fact, he grew more agitated, his frustration rising as he pushed her away. "I told you, I don't want you here," he shouted, his voice filled with anger. "I need Audra. Not you. Leave me alone." The harsh words echoed in Allie's ears as she stumbled back, her body trembling with the weight of his rejection. She had always been there for him, supporting him through thick and thin, and now, she was nothing more than a stranger in his eyes. Her heart cracked wide open, the pain unbearable. But Noah's anger didn't stop there. He stood up suddenly, his movements sharp and erratic, and before Allie could react, he slapped her across the face. The sound of the slap rang through the room, a painful reminder of the depth of Noah's confusion and his inability to cope with his situation. Allie's hand flew to her cheek, the sting of the slap sinking deep into her skin, but the emotional pain was far worse. She had never imagined Noah would hurt her like this. She had never imagined that the man she loved would be so far gone that he couldn't even remember the love they had shared. She looked at him, her tears falling freely now. "How could you?" she cried, her voice trembling with hurt and disbelief. Noah stood there, chest heaving, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. "You're just in the way," he muttered, his eyes not meeting hers. "I need Audra. She's the only one who matters." With those words, Noah turned away from her, retreating into the corner of the room. Allie, broken and defeated, stood there for a moment, her heart heavy with the realization that everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in, was slipping through her fingers. She had no choice but to walk away. The man she loved was gone, and all that was left was a stranger who couldn't even remember her name. As Allie left the room, Nick and Sharon stood in the doorway, helpless and heartbroken. They had watched their son drift away, watched him lose himself in the fog of memory, and now they had to face the consequences of his pain. Noah wasn't the same person he had been before the accident. He was different, harder, colder, and they couldn't protect him from the anger and confusion that were consuming him. In the end, the path ahead for Noah, Allie, and the entire Newman family was uncertain. Could Noah ever recover the memories of the love he had shared with Allie? Could he heal from the trauma of his accident and return to the person he once was? Or would he remain trapped in the darkness of his own mind, unable to find his way back to the family who loved him? As Noah lay in his hospital bed, still lost in the labyrinth of his mind, one thing was clear: the road to recovery would be long, and the cost would be steep. For Allie, for Nick and Sharon, and for Noah himself, the journey had only just begun. And no one knew where it would lead. Noah's eyes fluttered open, but the world around him felt foreign. The room was sterile, too clean, too white, everything about it screamed that he wasn't supposed to be here. His head pounded, and his vision swam as he tried to piece together the fragments of his scattered thoughts. He shifted in the bed, his body sore, his muscles stiff from what felt like days of unconsciousness. But it wasn't the pain that disturbed him most, it was the overwhelming sense of disconnection. Every familiar sound, every familiar face felt distant, like he was floating in an ocean of confusion and isolation. He glanced around the room, trying to make sense of the faces hovering near him. Nick and Sharon, his parents, were sitting at his bedside, their eyes filled with concern. He wanted to reach out to them, to feel the reassurance of their love, but their presence felt like a hazy memory, one that he couldn't quite grasp. They were strangers in this new world he had found himself in, and that realization made his chest tighten with panic. "What happened?" Noah's voice came out hoarse, weak, as if he hadn't spoken in years. Nick's face softened, and he leaned forward. "You were in an accident, Noah. A really bad one." Noah stared at him, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Accident? But I don't remember." His voice cracked, and panic began to rise within him. The more he tried to remember, the more it slipped away from him, like sand through his fingers. Sharon, trying to offer comfort, reached out and gently placed her hand on his. It's okay, Noah. You don't need to remember everything right away. You're safe now. But Noah wasn't comforted. He felt a deep emptiness inside, a growing dread that he couldn't shake. The life he once knew was nothing but a distant echo, and the people who loved him now felt like nothing more than shadows. He recoiled from Sharon's touch, his heart pounding in his chest. No, this isn't right. This isn't real. His panic escalated, and before anyone could stop him, he swung his legs off the bed, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through his body as he tried to stand. I need to leave, he muttered, his voice a mix of fear and frustration. I need to get out of here. Nick rushed to his side, his face a mixture of concern and helplessness. Noah, you need to stay in bed. You're not well. You can't just leave. But Noah wasn't listening. His mind was clouded with confusion, and every word Nick spoke felt like an intrusion into his already fractured reality. I don't know who you are, he said, his voice breaking. I don't remember any of this. The words hung in the air, heavy and painful. Sharon's eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't speak. She couldn't find the right words, not when her son was slipping further away from her. Noah, in his panicked state, ignored the pain in his body as he attempted to walk out of the room. He felt trapped, suffocated by the unfamiliar faces, the sterile environment that seemed to press in on him from all sides. The voices around him blurred, and all he could focus on was the need to escape. It was then that Allie entered the room. She had been outside, struggling with her own feelings of helplessness, unsure of how to deal with Noah's condition. But hearing his voice, seeing his desperation, she couldn't stay away. She rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face as she took his hand. Noah, please, she begged, her voice trembling. Don't do this. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. But Noah recoiled, his confusion only deepening. Who are you? His voice was cold, distant. I don't know you. The words cut through Allie like a blade, and for a moment, she stood frozen, her heart breaking in front of him. The man she loved, the man who had shared so many memories with her, now couldn't even recognize her. She felt as though everything she had fought for, everything they had built together, was slipping through her fingers. But even in her pain, she refused to back down. She couldn't. She couldn't abandon him now, not when he needed her the most. I'm Allie, she said softly, her voice breaking. I'm the one who's been by your side. Don't you remember me, Noah? Please. But Noah shook his head, his face twisted in frustration. I don't know you. I don't want you here. His voice was sharp, his rejection cutting deeper with each passing moment. I need Audra. Where is she? I remember Audra. She's the only one who matters. The name Audra echoed in Allie's mind like a poison. She had known about Audra, of course, Noah's past with her, the complicated history between them. But hearing him say her name now, with such certainty, made Allie feel as though she had been erased. Noah's attachment to Audra, his insistence that she was the only one he could remember, shattered her heart all over again. Her eyes filled with tears as she tried to reach him, but Noah pushed her away, his face contorted with anger. I don't need you here, he repeated, his voice louder this time. I want Audra, not you. Allie's chest tightened, the pain nearly suffocating her. She tried to stay strong, tried to remind herself that this wasn't Noah, it was his memory loss, his confusion. But every rejection, every cold word from him, felt like a personal attack. The love she had for him, the connection they had once shared, seemed to be slipping further and further away, leaving her with nothing but the shadows of a life they could no longer share. In a moment of desperation, Allie shouted, Noah, please. I'm not leaving you. I won't give up on you. But her words seemed to have no effect. And then, in a burst of anger, Noah's hand shot out and slapped her. The sound of the slap rang through the room, a sharp, brutal sound that left Allie standing there, stunned, her hand pressed to her cheek. Nick and Sharon rushed to intervene, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Allie's heart shattered, her world crumbling around her. She stood there for a moment, unable to move, her mind reeling from the shock of what had just happened. "Noah, why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Noah, still filled with frustration and confusion, turned his back on her. "I don't want you here," he muttered, his voice distant. "I need Audra. Only Audra." Allie stood there, her face wet with tears, her heart breaking into pieces. She had never imagined this, never imagined that the man she loved would become a stranger, one who would hurt her in the way he just had. But she wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. Not yet. Nick and Sharon, though devastated by the sight of their son's pain and the brokenness of his memory, turned to Allie, offering what comfort they could. "We're here, Allie," Sharon said gently, her voice soft. "We're not leaving you." Nick placed a hand on Allie's shoulder, his voice firm but kind. "We'll get through this together. Noah will remember, Allie. He has to." But Allie didn't know if she could wait for that. She didn't know if she could continue to love someone who couldn't even remember her, who couldn't even recognize the woman who had stood by him through everything. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to walk away. Not yet. Not until she had given him every chance to remember the love they once shared.